Hello. Lovely cup of Chinese tea. Well, welcome to another lesson. I want to look at today some like punches off angles. So we've looked at basic punches on all our kind of standard angles to a centre line that's directly opposite to ours. But I want to escalate our basics. That's an idea that I'll talk about in future videos. I've filmed these videos. I've already got like, I don't know, another 30 or something that are set to come out. And sometimes I film some and put them back in the timeline. Stay away from my boiling hot brew. That's why I've got a bit of facial hair, because I'm growing a beard a bit later on in the series. A bit of time travel today. And then sometimes I think like, well, I need to go back and maybe just, I've gone a bit too far ahead with some stuff and I need to fill in with some basics. So that's kind of what I want to do today in terms of looking at punching on some off angles. And it's an idea that I explain later on in the videos that we call escalating basics. So the other thing I want to say is I've seen a few things online that may be worth commenting on. I know like my channel is far too humble for the great and super successful Chinese martial arts commentators out there to be paying any attention to, but I pay attention to them, and some of the things that I see I think like maybe need commenting on a little bit, because it just like what we want to do is nourish everyone's growth. So from beginner right through to those people themselves who, you know, I would hope to help as well, to just try and get some as we go along and people see, you know, the kind of scientific basis of the stuff that I'm talking about, and what we're showing here is the real content, that it can help people. And I know people aren't always open to that, I know that, but nevertheless it can help everyone else by talking about it. So one of the things I saw was someone saying like, well, you learn basics and you just practice basics and then you don't give up on basics, and then all the way through your training career, you know, you keep practicing these basics and you get better and better at the same basics all the time. And we don't use that idea very much in Yiquan, and it's not an idea that's used more widely in wushu, and it's an indication of someone who hasn't really, well, you can see it in the achievement level, that if you train like that, then you're stuck at the level of basics forever. And it's not like doing the basic exercise like, yeah, okay, yes, it's true that sometimes you find deeper and deeper things in the basic exercise, but it's not about that. That's more like Confucius talks about, going back and visiting basics every so often to find new things. And what I'm getting at is something really important that me and some of my wushu brothers learned, because we trained with a different coach previously, and for a very long time, in fact, in traditional Nanchuan. And it was so stance based, and we did so much horse stance and bow stance and basic stance work, like to the point of ridiculousness, to the point where we're doing so much horse stance and bow stance and punch and stuff like that in the end you can't help but cheat it, you know, like it's too much to endure on one class. So then later on, when we start training with our, you know, for various reasons, what we would call our proper coach, you know, professional coach from China, the first thing that happened was that all ended, and like the amount of basic stance training that we did like that was reduced 90%, but within 6 months we were all 1,000 times better, because what we focused on instead was attention to detail, getting it right, and then when you've got it right, escalating the basic onto another thing. So you add something else onto that basic. So what you consider to be the basic becomes slightly more complicated, and building like that, so that, you know, at a certain point, like even like forms that when you start training look like, wow, that's amazing, that form becomes a basic training form, and so on. And we use that idea in Yiquan as well. It's part of the proper content of Yiquan, that we escalate the basics all the time, so you don't get stuck like us, you know, spending a decade or more just doing stances that actually were never getting any better, and really our overall level wasn't getting any better. It's a really important moral tale to learn. And this discussion can then help us expand a little bit into thinking about some things around whole body power and whole body integration. And I suppose the first thing to say about that is, yeah, you can think about these things on multiple different levels. Oh no, the first thing to say about that is, yeah, okay, I include a lot of kind of intellectual content into these lessons, and this is something that Yao Zongzong talks about, that actually this is one of the most enjoyable things about Yiquan, like exploring it intellectually and thinking about it. But it's not just navel gazing, and I know I don't think anyone pays any attention to me, you know, but I do sometimes see things on the internet with other Yiquan instructors and martial arts instructors in the Chinese martial arts community, and I think, is that a reference to me? Is that just my ego thinking that anyone would give a damn? But people talking about things like, don't over focus on theory and just do practice, and that's not the way, and that's not. I mean, Wang Xiangjia himself was explicit about this, that you've really got to think about it philosophically in terms of sports science, and what we do is we use that information to inform how we train, and then how we build up our training process and drills, and then we bring that into live training and practical use. And we only really need to understand these concepts once, and then they'll just keep unfolding. And that's really the important thing about the idea of whole body interconnectivity and whole body power, that actually, as I've said many times, you can understand these things on multiple different levels, and it's one of the indicators of someone who's like really on the right path. And that's also something that's kind of been thrown up recently, like how do you understand whether someone's on the right path? How do you judge that? Can maybe talk about that another time. But one of the right ways that you judge it is that someone understands that the same concept can be understood on multiple different levels. So yeah, people can be talking about, I saw someone put out a video about whole body power, and it was mostly wrong, but you could see why at like a certain level you think it's like that, but later on you can see that it's not like that, that it's too simplistic to think like that, and I'll talk about some of those things today, I think. And so let's just crack on with that, I suppose. So the first thing, that's such lovely tea, and I keep using too much as well, like with Chinese tea, dried Chinese tea, like even if you just put like a pinch in, it expands into so much. It's like, now you need like a micro pinch. I can never get it quite right. So let's think about this first of all. So we can do our basic Yiquan jab like this that we've looked at, like. So we've looked at, there's different kinds of Yiquan jabs, and we recognise that, and I'll talk about another time the idea that these are what we call cultural sets, that they're based on a fundamental kind of movement concept called the natural set, or the Shaolin natural set, and these are what we call cultural sets. So they're expansions of core movement principles to solve a particular kind of problem. And we recognise there's a kind of Western boxing cultural set in each one, and there's also like a Xingyiquan cultural set in each one, and there's more Bagua based cultural sets and so on. And other people continue to bring in different flavours. So this is from our kind of Western boxing cultural set. We talked about the idea of just like, well, they call it straight but not straight punch, but that's to do with the unity of square and circle in the way that the body functions, like i.e. the crookedness of the arm. And we've talked about punching in a direct line like that. And I'll talk about another time. I talk about in a later video that I've got coming out. One of the reasons that we do this is that we don't want the brittleness of the punch like that, because it can get damaged if it's too straight like that. We want to keep this springiness, but we also want to keep the arm in line with the structure. So I don't want to go through it again, but this because I've talked about it before and I talk about it again. This kind of old way of doing the kind of Yao Yiquan punch. And again, there's really no such thing as Yao Yiquan. It doesn't exist really, because there's so many different variations of that. And this is one, to do the punch like that. And when you punch like that, the arm, there's so much force is on the joint of the arm that it disconnects the structure. So it disconnects the posture from the structure. And you can just think, like, if someone just pushes in like that, it just pushes back like that. So when the arm hits like that, there's so much pressure on the elbow joints that it disconnects the strike from the overall solidity of the punch, and it's dissipated in the loose. And it doesn't matter, you can tense the elbow as much as you possibly can. I'll come back to that idea in a moment. You can tense the elbow as much as you possibly can, but that doesn't matter. It's the angle of the force that's hitting like that, that's pushing against the elbow, so it's dissipated. But when we change that and bring the punch up like that into this straight but not straight punch, the force is pushed back into the shoulder, and the way the shoulder is linked into the whole body, goes down into the back leg like that, and it's a much stronger, solid structure, and that helps us transmit more force. It's a more solid punch, but the idea is that we're generating force in the body, and we need to transmit that force to the contact point. It's the kind of thing people talk about, but on like a really trivial level, if we're honest. We want to transmit it to the contact point, so as we've talked about before, there's got to be certain things in place. The consistency of the body is one of our key ideas that we've talked about multiple times. And one of the ways that we can understand whether people are on this kind of lower level or beginner level, like the problem is like when people are on this kind of like much lower level of thinking about these things, but like in terms of like, you know, it's not, I've said before, it's not about popularity. I'm happy with a few people just watching and learning from me. But if you've got like tens of thousands of followers and your videos are getting hundreds and hundreds of views, and people saying, oh, you know, that's amazing, but really it's like, it's really obviously not right. And then the people get misinformed, and the project here is to reinvigorate Chinese wushu and show that it's world leading, and we can't do that. We can't do that with these kind of these lower tier understandings that are kind of presenting themselves as like higher tier understandings. It's just like it's just erasing the arts, because one thing that you can see straight away is that those people cannot demonstrate it. You know, they'll be talking about whole body power, but they can't really punch a bag or anything like that. They can't really do any sparring or anything. Or you never see that. It's not really practical. It doesn't work. And the reason for that is it's not real. It's not real. It's like a really lower tier. Talks about the idea of the complexity pyramid before. It's lower tier on the pyramid. The real thing is simpler but more profound. So you can think like there's people talking about whole body power, but what they really are talking about is whole body connectivity and bringing more of the body structure into the posture. But there's a lot to that other than just saying it. So one of the things you can think about is like what Wang Xiangjia calls brittle force, or square movement that leads to brittle structure. You can tense your body as hard as you possibly can like that, and that will transmit more force. If you could generate force, it would transmit more force because the structure is solid, just like sound will travel through a solid object, you know, like the solidity of the structure just allows more. So you could stand like that, and really, really tense, and someone could come behind you and push you like that, and you would transmit all that force very efficiently through your body into a target. You could probably just palm someone in the back of their arm if they were doing that, and you could punch with force. Just like you could just do that with a stick. You know, a stick is, you know, solid. But you can't generate force. So this is the kind of much more scientific and sophisticated understanding of when we start thinking about whole body structure and in relation to whole body power, and that these are not the same thing. So that's whole body structure like that, but it can't generate any power. Like you could fall forwards like that, or maybe you could start to compromise and just use your feet or something like that. And then Wang Xiangjia says, but also like it's quite brittle. It's quite a brittle structure that it's quite easy to injure yourself, and we want like a springier posture. Critically, it's not just about not injuring yourself, it's about generating force, it's about generating whole body power. So it's about how you use your structure, and there's different ways we can do that in each one. One of the most important ones, of course, is screwing force with Farley, so the way that the whole body twists into a posture. That we need a certain amount of relaxation in the body in order to be able to do that, to move fast, to maximise, you know, speed times mass, or mass times velocity. To maximise that equation, we need a certain amount of relaxation in the body to be able to move fast and to use screwing force to twist all the different parts of the body into the striking point. But we also need to be able to have enough body solidity to transmit that force to the target point. And again, one of the really big differences here, like can people actually hit with power? Like, so I've seen a lot of people talking about what counts as identifying someone who knows what they're talking about, like, and you see some kind of weird things like, like, well, like, do you know who my teacher was? Like, oh, I don't care. Which, might be interesting, but it's not that interesting, Like, it's like in the academic world, like I meet people whose PhD supervisor was some really famous person who I really respect, but that doesn't mean that I respect that person or that I think they have the same knowledge or understanding. That doesn't matter at all. And I think hopefully people are starting to understand part of the project of what I'm doing here. It is very deliberately to erase all of that and to force people to make a decision about what really matters here. Like my coach said, only your actual level matters. That's the only thing. And only is it the real thing. That's all that matters, to pursue that. Can people accept that? And it's amazing how many people can't. One of the ways that you're going to establish, like, is it the real thing, is, does it conform to the principles, the sensible principles of each one that you can identify because they are interlinked with the training process? For example, like Xingyiquan says, he's a student of Xingyiquan, is there like a clear sports science rationale for why you're doing Zhangzhuang and how that then links into how you hit with power? If there isn't, then we've got a problem. Like, you might be right, you might be able to do it. Wang Shenjai talks about this and says, like, well, you might be able to do it, but if you don't understand what the link is, then you can't teach it. Then you start teaching the wrong things and then your students can't get it. So there's got to be a clear rationale between the standing and what you're doing. So another kind of deviation that people have kind of brought in is starting to say things like, well, each one is just good structure. And then they start looking at boxes and saying, yeah, well, this boxer proves that each one works. And it's like, that's just, like, you might as well stick your head up your arse and pull it out your mouth, because that boxer's not trained in each one, So why would anyone do all these hours of standing and training the each one method? Why not just go boxing? Like, it doesn't make any sense whatsoever. It's just stealing their credibility. Look at, people saying, look at Mike Tyson and how he conforms to each one principles. And really what's going on there is people saying, each one is just good structure. Each one is just good structure. So anyone who's got good structure is each one. Therefore, each one's proven by people who don't do each one. If you tried to put in an argument like that in the academic world, you would just be laughed out of the university. It's absurd, and it's obviously absurd. I'm prone to a rant, so I'll calm down and have a sip of brew. You've got to show, as Xingyiquan says, what's the link here? Why are you developing this? And what's the link with the actual movement, the movement content itself? And he also says it's absolutely nothing to do with, like, boxing, Western boxing versus Xingyiquan or something like that. He says, like, he trained with Yao Zhongzhun, Wang Shangjai and Han Xingqiao, and he said, like, actually it's all the same. It's just like the different sets, they're just different cultural sets based on the different backgrounds. And so, what a digression. So one of the things that we need to see is, like, can you use each one principles to hit with power? Can you stand in front of the flag and hit with power? Not can Mike Tyson hit with power. We know Mike Tyson can hit with power. Does the each one method have any rationale behind it that you can look and you can see? And it doesn't matter, did you have a boxing match? And it doesn't matter, like, who your teacher was, and it doesn't matter what Mike Tyson does. What matters is the thing itself and how we explain it. So we want to develop this kind of springy movement structure, and that's also very important in the transmission of force. What can confuse people here, I think, is that, okay, this is structure, so we can see, and we can use this idea, and then I'll criticise it in a moment, that people talk about the idea of a kinetic chain. And you can see that when you throw the jab and it hits, and even though I know the each one punch is quite odd and it's got these bent joints and things like that, you can see me at the bag, you can see I can hit with power, and it's not the kind of power that has to be embarrassed in front of other people who do other things like boxing and MMA and Muay Thai. The one thing I'm never embarrassed about is my ability to issue power. We can see from the posture that there's this kind of link, it's linked into in a way that this isn't, you know, that all the force is on the elbow, that it's the force goes back much more. That's why we use this. I'll talk about it another time, but that's why we use this slightly straighter punch now. Particularly the people who their teachers came from, like the trained with the Yao brothers. That this straighter punch, that it structurally pushes back into this big muscle group, and then that structurally pushes back into the back foot like that. So then that people say, well, that's, you know, whole body structure. The whole body's involved with it. That's absolutely fine. And then they say that's whole body power, and that all seems to make sense until we change. So let's say now we want to punch off angle. So instead of punching directly in line with my front foot, let's say my opponent moves and I punch off angle like that without changing anything else. So I punch off angle like that. Now something completely different happens with my structure. So and also the way that we do this posture changes. So for the jab, normally we do that. We use this pivot routing like that. But for this posture, when we punch off line, it changes and we set the posture. I'll talk about setting postures later on in another video. We set the posture slightly differently so that the foot is anchoring the punch this way. So a change has taken place in the way that the posture is structurally rooted. So from here, it's rooted, it's pushing back from the back foot, and you can say there's maybe this kinetic chain, if you like, that goes down to the back foot like that. And we change and push off angle very much like a hook. Now this foot is pushing that way, and that's anchoring the push much like a hook to just push off angle like that. And this foot isn't doing quite the same thing, this back foot, in the way that here you can feel that it's pushing forward into the punch and locking the posture. Here it isn't in any way, like it loses. As much as this takes over, pushing that way to structurally strengthen the punch, as much as that takes over, that loses in terms of pushing into the rooting of the punch like that. And this is exactly what you do. If you had to push someone, you just brace it, you're just bracing it with this foot. And again, this is like the scientific sophistication of rooting and the art of rooting. This level of scientific understanding of it, this is the next gen. This is the next gen of Yiquan. Again, we're happy to help those people, you know, to kind of upgrade to this stuff, but I think the barriers to achieving that are maybe a little bit too unassailable in most cases. But look at what's happened now. So what about our kinetic chain? Where's it gone? So our kinetic chain that goes all the way back down to the back foot like that, the moment we change and punch off line, right, this foot's bracing this punch, but there's no kinetic chain coming into the body and then out again. It's gone. It's gone. It's just here, and here, this is the harmony with the, it's gone. We're still generating force around the rotational Farley like this, but this is gone. So this kinetic chain back down to the floor, pushing it in like that. Now it's pushing from that, so now we've got this big gap here, and the structure is held together in a completely different way. So it's not just, so when I hit, for example, when I hit straight on like that, the idea of this crooked line like this is that there is an average line going through that pushes back into the shoulder. The more I take it offline like that, the more the energy is going back that way, and the more, just like when we did this punch, so much energy was dissipated in the elbow. Same way when we punch off that way, so much energy is dissipated in the shoulder, and it has to be accounted for by muscular strength rather than just being pushed back into the whole body structure. And that of course tells us a couple of really important things, and one of which is that muscular strength is important if you want to vary and build your ability across more complex punches. And it also explains a lot, I'll talk about another time, but the way that Xingyiquan functions and why it needed to evolve, why it was considered too basic by Wang Chengjian and like that, to get around the idea. I mean, it's very culturally constructed, and we're talking about, in most cases, like people who didn't have an amazing diet, you know, like that. You would very rarely see like hugely muscular people in China 200 years ago, like, because most people were too poor for one thing. Don't have the kind of diets that people have like in a late capitalist society. So being able to maximize physical force, and this journey of trying to understand how can a physical body maximize force. So you think like very linear and get everything in line with the body in the punch like that can solidify the structure. And I'll talk about in some future videos, like this became very problematic almost immediately. Like when Wang Shengzai started thinking about it, like when you start meeting much better fighters like Western boxers and people like that, that it's just not enough. You need to be able to punch more fluidly and off at angles, and so you can't just use this kind of linear. There are some, but it always uses this kind of movement in. Even if they change like this, it always uses this very linear form of movement to try and get the physical body behind the punch. And that's why I've seen this video on someone talking about whole body power, and he's really emphasising this idea of what later on we'll talk about as compensatory power, the use of a step to increase the mass that goes into the equation. And that's very, like, it's foundational in Xingyiquan that not all postures, but like 90% of postures use compensatory power, i.e. a step to add force into the posture. And that's all about maximising these kind of the power you can get out of these linear strikes, and the principle that if I can just end the fight in one punch, then it won't really matter. But now that we punch offline with a punch, all of that is gone, and even if we do it with a step, we lose a lot of that. It's dissipated in the joints because the force is going that way, not pushing back into the body. And again, it's such a simple thing. Why don't people know this? Like it's such a simple thing, yet, you know, the video that I was looking at, you know, like a hugely successful channel running an online program, it's such a simple, basic thing to explain, but it's just not there. It's just not there in the understanding of the, because the training isn't fight focused. That's the answer. The training isn't fight focused in the way that Wang Shengzai was fight focused, thinking about fight focused, but in a culturally relative paradigm. So thinking about other martial artists and foreign martial arts and different styles, and being able to be more adaptive. That it wasn't enough to just do it like Guo Yunshen did it. Wasn't going to be enough anymore. Thinking about it differently. And yet what we have is, and again, one of the things that, like this person talks about this idea of, like, you know, like identifying what is authentic, and again, I've talked about this, like of going back to the past to look at what is authentic. What did people say in the past? And Zhao Daoxin says, well, you can't do that because the people in the past live in the past, and you might as well just live in a cave, and you've no idea what's going on in the wider martial arts world. So it's just like, you know, back in the day thinking that stand-up was enough on its own, and then along come the Gracies and everything changes, and you've got to learn about takedown defence and ground fighting, and, you know, there's no way around it. You yield and overcome, you adapt and learn that stuff. That's the only way around it. You can't just live in a cave. If you live in a cave, then of course you're going to be invincible. This is the argument Zhao Daoxin makes. So Guo Yunshen's in a cave of time. It's a different age, he's fighting different people. He's thinking about different problems. So now what this also tells us, this kinetic chain is no longer there, so the kinetic chain concept doesn't really work. Or the kinetic chain pretty much just ends here. But whole body power isn't just that. And again, this online video that I was looking at, that I'm kind of critiquing, why I very much felt the need to make this video. He talks about this idea that once you start, like, and he criticises people who do this. So yeah, I suppose I have to take it back and say that he does know this. He does know this, but he criticises it. Like people who are punching offline. And it's like, it's such backwards thinking. It's like the Yiquan revolution happened, and then some, like, people just get their claws in it and they just try and drag it back. And I think very much that's why, you know, Wang Shengzai particularly disliked Sun Lutang, and I think that's very much why, that he saw it like that Sun Lutang was just trying to drag everything back, while at the same time kind of making it look like everything was going forward. That's my feeling. So this guy says, like, well, once you start punching offline like that, you lose this whole body power. And Actually, that's just a complete misunderstanding. What changes is the whole body connectivity and the way that that functions. So you lose this kinetic chain, if you like, down to the back foot, and it's replaced by this relationship between this foot and this foot. And this plays about, you know, a quarter or a third of the role. But you're still generating force, and you're still generating a lot of force, because whole body power isn't the same thing as whole body structure. Whole body structure is about the way that the body knits together and is integrated. And that means that you don't have to always be in line like in Xingyiquan. It can still be integrated and knitted together like this, but there's compromises with different punches. So you lose this kinetic line back down to the back foot. It's replaced by this. There's a big gap here where the kinetic chain should be. There should be like, if there was like a stick from the foot to the hand supporting it, then there'd be like that kinetic chain, but there's not, there's just a gap. There's just a gap. But the body's still whole body structure. It's in the way, it's in the nature of the movement itself, as I push it. You know, that we develop through standing, and this links back to what Xingyiquan's saying, like, you can demonstrate the link to standing and why we do that. And people who can't do that, I'll talk about that in a moment, you've got to raise some question marks over that. So we've still got whole body structure. It's not the same kind of structure, and some compromises are being made in terms of how the forces are dissipated through the body. And strength of the shoulder is going to play, and relaxation as well, is going to play a key role in that. But also, we're still able to generate an enormous amount of power, because whole body power isn't the same thing as whole body integrated structure. They're two separate concepts. So we're still able to use this turning off line like that to punch, and use the far lead round the axis, and use the screen force like that to generate force. And you can still generate a ridiculous amount of force doing it like that. It's just slightly less structurally supported, but so what? So what? What we gain from that is that instead of like in Xingyiquan, like, as long as you stay on that line, maybe if you change, I can change like a robot like that, you know, and maybe I've got like an odd punch like that. What we gain instead is now we can, doesn't matter where you are, we can change and move like that. That's like just an infinite upgrade from what Xingyiquan was doing. Takes all its movement principles mostly from Xingyiquan. But it's such an enormous upgrade that it just starts making this trivial when people start saying like, yeah, but if you punch off line, you lose this kinetic chain. Who cares? Who cares? That's nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. So key takeaway is that the structural posture, the whole body interconnectivity is not the same thing as whole body power. Whole body power comes from Farley, release of force, screen force in most cases. There's other kinds of force like articulated force. So for example, when we use this kind, I'll talk about in another video, you see all the time, you know, people do push hands like that. This is what we call articulated force. It doesn't involve screen force in the arms in the same way. So there are different kinds of ways of using force in each one. Oh, excuse me, I'm sucking on I suffer a lot with bad throat, so I do have a condition with my throat, so I'm sucking on a sweet. Makes it a lot better. So our first exercise anyway, thinking about offline punching, is just to punch offline, like that. I'm really feeling how it roots from the punch like that. And from there we can take that into all our different steps that we've learned before. So we can just, I'm just going to do this, and if I get near you and I release force, it's just going to be your fault. No. Treasure. I don't need to go through them all because hopefully by now you've done lots of training yourself like that. But you can, practice all these weird little steps. Doing all that. But then something else also interesting happens if we start thinking about this the other way. So let's say we want to go and punch offline this way. Now we have it's like you know, everything in Yiquan's like contradiction and then contradiction finding the dot triangle of the mean. What's the happy medium here? Because this is like the exact opposite problem. So here we change, look, the kinetic chain, if you want to call it that, or what some people are calling whole body power. What we really want to talk about, it's not even whole body connectivity, because whole body connectivity involves this was the other thing, by the way, that I thought was very important that this person talks about. He talks about harmony of mind and body, or intent and body. And he describes this as like what Bruce Lee would call emotional content, like when you really hitting with the intent to drive through them and, you know, knock them down. And that's such a trivial understanding of intent. Like I think the thing itself that we're trying to get across here is almost lost when we start thinking about it like that. It's like, yeah, that's important, but that's by no means what we're talking about when we're talking about intent. When we're talking about, he talks about Santi Shi, where you stand, hold the posture like this, and he says like, this is to give you structure. And it's like, no, you've already got structure. You've already got structure. It's how you use structure. So it doesn't give you structure. If you're walking about, you've already mastered structure. You've already got structure. It's how you use structure. So when we talk about intent and the harmony of intent in the body, we're talking about something that I've talked about all the time that's much more like, for example, sexuality or sensuality, where your intention floods the body and it becomes part of the body, that your body becomes much more, not sensitive to pain, but much more aware, like your awareness floods the whole body. And then that allows you to start using it as a much more organic whole. What we think of as mind and body being separated, or the mind just being in the head, we erase that distinction and it becomes part of the whole body. And that's what we're training through Santi Shi or other kinds of Xingyiquan. That's what we're training, that. We're not training to give you a body, you've already got one. Starting to sound a little bit irritated, aren't I? When we do this, we've still got this, what I'm going to call, like let's just say in this case, it's like a direct kinetic chain again. So it's gone there, and it comes back here because it goes. So what it is, I'm punching across like that, and I'm changing across. And you can see that the rule for the back foot is that my back foot changes and points along with the punch like that to root the posture. And when we do that, we've got this chain, it's going all the way back to the foot, and someone pushes in this way, it's linked into this big muscle down. In many ways, much better even than that. You can really feel the push off with that, but you can also feel how unbelievably off balanced that is. So it absolutely maximizes this rule that people are talking about, this person's talking about, people are talking about, that whole body structure is all in line and everything's in line, and you're not isolating a punch going off on a line like that so that the forces go off in the wrong direction. It all goes straight back to the line. But you're off balance. You're really off balance when you do that. So that tells you that if you just only have that principle as your guiding idea, and that's what you think whole body power is, then you're just going to fall over like that, because the whole idea falls over with that posture. And even if you don't do that, I know I can hear some people saying, well, don't turn your foot up. Even if you don't, it's exactly the same. If you punch off line like that, you're so, this is what Xingyiquan would call being empty. You're so empty on that side. 1, 2. So you're really strong this way, but you're really empty that way. You just fall that way. It's really weak. That tells us something, you know, that it's not just about trying to establish one of these kinetic chains. Actually, what we need in terms of actual fight theory is significantly more sophisticated, and that is very much why we need the art of rooting, why we need to understand. And the intent needs to have this vehicle that's learned all these tricks, if you like, that we've drilled in to be able to do this intuitively. And you can probably guess that what we do is instead we just change the whole posture this time, like that. This foot comes out, this changes like that. So we just hit and stop, like that. And again, the way to think about it is that this arm pulls it back like that. We change to the punch point like that. Punching offline from the punch. There's a limit to how far we want to. Wouldn't want to go much further than that. You can hear the way the root sets like that. So this way 1 and this way 2. We need a little. And the front foot goes first. Just a little 1, 2 like that. Then still all in line, but it always is with a cross anyway. So we don't punch off line at all like that. I'm not saying never. I mean, the whole point is to be able to break the rules, isn't it? I mean, sometimes you might want to. See, we adapt it in different ways. Like if you want to do that kind of punch, there's a punch like that. Like you can do that. There's a punch like that in Xingyiquan where you punch across like that. Like black sparrow punch or something like that. Hawk punch maybe. You punch across like this way. This again, it isolates the. If you like the kinetic chain, because it's got this big gap here, but you compensate for that with the twist, but it's not that powerful anyway. And we can do things like lean back like that, which drops the back leg, which creates a more solid root on the back leg. There's all that little tricks you can do in an emergency. But for our basic practice, for the jab, we just want that, and we lose the. I meant to say we lose the. That we normally use in a jab like that, the big pivot round like that, and we'd really just do it like that. Like some people do for the jab, but it's wrong for reasons I've talked about multiple times. But we change now and we do that 1, 2, like that. Punch like that. And then for the cross, just practice. And then you just do the same for all your punches. So all your basic punches are just done like this. So we just like for example, we'll do uppercut, like that. And you just make the angle a little bit bigger on the arm like that. Don't try and get it flat in. Like that. And we just practice like that. You see how we use the theory, bring it into practice for drills, and then do it on pads, do it on bags, bring it into all our other fight craft training. Eventually bring it into sparring, and Bob's your uncle, it works. It's not that hard, you know. It's big, it's sophisticated, there's lots to it, but it's just practicing basic things, escalating those basics, making them more complex. Then we use our idea of the multiplier effect to start bringing those things together. So 1, 2. And you can start, like I did it the second time then, and then I didn't do it on the last one, because I thought maybe I shouldn't do it, and then I thought, no, I should do it. Our idea of quarter rooting, where you, 1, the foot doesn't go all the way down, just go straight into the next one like that. It's one of the most useful things you can learn in each one. It takes you from that level, that kind of really basic Yiquan training that you often see, and how do you go on the next level from that? Very much the problem that Yao Zhongzun himself had to solve with Xingyiquan. How do you go into a more complex combination? Quarter rooting is the answer to that. So go. Just don't put the foot goes 1, 2 like that without the heel setting back on the floor. Like that. And for the back, very similar. Foot stays up, so you do a straight cross, and you do the little skip round like that into the, like that. Later on, we've not got to it yet, but later on we'll talk about how we use somatic timing to time these punches with the muscle bounce, and we'll also talk about the idea of hit and flow. But for now, we can say we can do it like 1, and then the arm comes back a bit, and then 2 out again like that. That's one basic way. Like that. I was overemphasising it then so you can see it. But there's another way of doing it based on hit and stop. What we call hit and flow. It's an idea that comes from Tai Chi. So we do the jab, one like that, and then change again without pulling the hand back at all, like that. So I'm foreshortening it a bit so I can get more, so I can get some reach on the second one and some power. Like that. Or if we do it with the cross, like that. So we definitely, I'll talk about in another video, like we lose power because it's a compromise kind of punch, but it's a really good way to train your structure in there. So do all your different punches like that. And then again, you can use the multiplier effect to mix and match what you're doing with those punches. So you can, for example, like that. Put a hit and stop, and then flow straight into the, like that. Into the movement like that. Something else that I also heard this person say in that video was the idea that, like, he criticises what he calls whippy movements, that are very fast kind of, I don't know, calls them whippy movements. And actually when you lose that, like here, when you lose most of that kinetic structure, you've got to change a little bit into producing force, and sometimes that will be getting a little bit more whip on the movement, whatever it takes to maximise force. And the reason he criticises, I'm not sure what he meant by whippy movement. He seems to be criticising the traditional Xingyiquan of hit and relax kind of movement like that. But there's a reason for that, and that is when you're separated from the, like most punches actually, when you're sparring and doing bag work, most punches are separated from a clear kinetic chain like that. So the idea is to maximise force. The reality of the fight is what's important, not what's contained in some archaic Xingyiquan book. You've got to interpret that within the reality of the fight. So you've got this guy saying, like, your punches should never be disconnected from the whole body structure. What if your opponent moves over there? What are you going to do then? You know, well, hold on a minute, I've got to change. No, you've got to hit him because he's over there. And if you suddenly change and you're disconnected from this posture, from that whole body line back to the back root, then you've still got to maximise force, and you do whatever it takes. There's no rule that says don't do this because it's disconnected from the structure. If you can get a bit of whip on it and I'll add a bit of extra force, of course you do that. What reality is this stuff coming from? You know, I don't get it. I don't know if I'm whippy or not. It's such a fatuous critique. So, or we can do it like, even with a step like that, if we want a punch off angle, but that's a step, not punching off angles. Or we can do it like with this, what we call a somatic bounce or somatic timing. You see all the time in each one. Usually people do it quite big, like that. It bounces into the next posture like that. I explained that more in another video, so now we can just say like one, relax back into the next posture. So like that. And we could do all of those things, of course. We can do them with steps or however we want to do them. Punching well off the centre line with whatever the punch is. And then I suppose taking that idea of people being whippy, I suppose, was something else that I saw that I think should be contained in this idea, in this video, in this discussion. And that's someone demonstrating their Yiquan. And this is someone who talks a lot about structure and the idea of structure. And again, like, you've got to ask, well, what do you mean by that? Because what I mean by that isn't what he means by that. Structures are like a very big concept. And I try and do what he does in a particular demonstration. So very big wide stance, and then with this kind of movement. It's not quite right. It's too much Yow's lock point. this kind of movement with like a big side on. My coach could mimic anyone's movement, like just absolutely perfectly. No matter how great, no matter how rubbish, he could mimic their movement, which was absolutely hilarious. I don't even know if he even knew how funny it was, even though we were all rolling about laughing, but he was very strict about, why are you laughing? Which was hilarious when it was done to someone else, and not hilarious when it's done to you. You're like, yeah man, that's exactly how you move, and we're rolling about laughing. Then he does you and it's like, I don't move like that. Actually, it's like looking in a mirror. So obviously I'm not this person, and I'm not my coach, so the idea is I can't quite get the very particular way of walking in a kind of big wide stance, and this kind of movement with the which in a way I suppose comes into this idea of like whippy movement. Like, is it whippy movement, and what's wrong with whippy movement? That it disconnects the posture from the whole structure. And in this case, that's a legitimate critique, I think. Like, again, it's the doctrine of the mean, and again, recognising that people can be on the right tracks but really low down on the right track. So, yeah, disconnecting your technique from the structure to that degree. Once it goes like that, it starts becoming compensated for by the speed of the movement. So, actually, that's not structural. It's not really structural movement, apart from the fact that you have a structure. So, it's not structural movement in the way, for example, that I would mean structure. Structural movement for me, if I want to hit up that way, for one thing, I want to use screwing force. I don't just want to lift my arm up like that. And I'm not saying it's not going to spark you out. I'm pretty confident I could knock someone out if I caught them right under the chin like that, you know. Or I'd be knocked out if I was caught right under the chin like that. It's not what I'm saying at all. I'm saying, does it, like Xingyiquan says, does it conform to Yiquan principles? So I want to use screwing force, and I want to use lock point to transmit force. Because if I just do that, like, that's still got too much lock point in it from what this was demonstrated. If I want to just throw my arms up like that and do that, then the structure is being compensated for by the speed of the movement. That's the structure. Like the energy going up like that, so that when it hits the contact point, that the energy going up that's being generated from the body opposes the object that's struck and makes an impact and doesn't just fly off because of the speed going into the movement. Whereas, for one thing, I don't want to have I don't want my standard posture to be like this. It seems wrong, and I don't see how that's hands each one for a start, like, because I've got a lot of material from the hands and they don't do that. Even in the photos, they don't do that. In the videos, they don't do that. So they're pretty standard orthodox each one stance. But secondly, what we want to do is bring it to the lock point. So I'm going to do that stance anyway, and imagine my opponent's there. This is structurally integrated, so yeah, it's in the nature of the punch. This is one of the things to get. When the contact point hits, that the force goes down into the arm. So it's not locked in the way that a punch like that is locked back into the whole structure. The force is going back. This way it's going down like that, so a lot's taken on these muscles. So one of the ways to compensate for that is to hit really fast into the posture. But that's not structure in the way that we mean it in each one. Structure is to use whole body integration to lock into and then see how I'm still using even with a flat on posture, I'm still using the Farley, the rotational Farley around the axis, then the screwing force into the punch, and then the lock point to transmit all of that force to the contact point. Still got speed. It's significantly smaller movement than doing that. It's just doing that. It's getting a similar amount of power for a much smaller movement. And at the end of the day is our key rule note. The smallest possible movement for the most amount of power. That's too big. That's just as powerful, but it's smaller, and it's structurally lots, it's integrated. Plus this it contradicts our rule of going too far past the target. And it's not just people in hands Yiquan, so-called. I don't believe in any of these. All these things are meaningless. Hands Yiquan, Yao's Yiquan. If you understand a core, they're all meaningless. They're just cultural sets based on the core. You still see, too much. You see uppercuts like that as well, very high like that. Just it contradicts our core principle. Don't go too far past the target. If we don't want to go too far past the centre line, why would we want to go too far past the, is he up here? Hit the back of the head like that. No, it's here. So 1, 2, we don't want to go any further than that because we can change from there into another posture. So this is structural movement. And even if we use this walking like this kind of posture, we can still do that. I'm just not sure why we would. Just not sure why we would do that. It's the kind of thing my coach used to do. Just like the embarrassment. No, he didn't used to do that, but if you did that, he would do that. Hey, go out in a minute. So it's a different way of thinking about structure. So quite theoretical today, and I didn't really want to do that. I wanted to look at some practical stuff. So maybe I can look at that, and maybe you can have a part 2. But to understand that there's this really key difference between the generation of power and the structure that transmits that power to a contact point. And that, in essence, is the difference between whole body interconnectivity and whole body power. And they're not the same thing. And also, structure is not just like anyone who throws a punch and your legs are like this and your arms like this, so that structure, therefore it's Yiquan, and therefore, if Mike Tyson throws a punch, therefore that's Yiquan. No, that's not true. And really, Yiquan's dead, isn't it? Like, if you want to be like Mike Tyson, why would you do Yiquan? Just the whole thing's dead if we start thinking like that. So, food for thought. It's critical but constructive. Like that's the reality. It's critical but constructive. You don't hear me saying this is right because this is who my teacher was, or this is right because this is what Mike Tyson did, or this is right because, not that there's anything wrong with that. This thing that Mike Tyson doesn't do is right because Mike Tyson does this. You don't hear me saying that. It's right because it's right. It's right because it's the truth. It's right because it's obviously right. It's on another level of right. Okay, that's it. One love. Take it easy.